It's my pleasure to introduce our panel today, Hot Hands and Cool Decks, Balancing Poker Strategy and Psychology in Poker. Our panelists today are Alexandra Botez. She's the co-host and founder of Botez Live. We have Nate Silver, a statistician, author, and founder of Silver Bulletin. We also have Xuan Liu, who's a professional poker player. Our panel today will be moderated by Jennifer Shahade. She is an author, poker player, and chess grandmaster. Our panel will run for approximately 40 minutes, and we'll reserve some time at the end for questions from the audience, so please submit them through our app, Cadence. With that being said, I'll hand it over to Jennifer Shahade, our moderator for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Today, I'm so excited to start with the hottest hand of the year. We actually have Xuan Liu, who won the Global Poker Award for the best hand of the year. And we're going to look at it right now. Ready to cue up the video? I got to get you all in suspense. Okay. We can. There it is.
Unbelievable flop for the kid. Xuan, the luck for Xuan today. Kings go down twice, aces go down.
Or pairs.
She does have some outs now.
No longer the nuts for the kid. Some boats possibly available. But we see that nobody has that boat. Kid still with 83% equity. He's a little bit thirsty.
Making the call. Biggest pot of the day. Already. And we still have a river to come. And some calls to make. Xuan looking for an ace or a four. She's going all in. Oh my God. Corvette Mike will not be calling here for the remainder of his chips. Unbelievable pot brewing. He makes the call. What the fuck? What is going on?
I fold. Snap fold.
Oh my God.
Ace high flush.
Whoa.
These aces who had no equity now at 93%. Just like that, Rick.
Well, there it is. Yeah, another round of applause for Xuan. Xuan, they say that making money in poker is all about getting worse hands to call or better hands to fold. In this hand, you somehow did both.
Yeah,
Can you tell us about it?
I certainly didn't win the award for best played hand, but sometimes there's just a perfect storm, and the universe kind of just conspires to let you win somehow, and it just goes to show that there's just so much randomness, and you can never really know what your opponents are thinking. And in this case, I was against, first of all, I'm on a stream game, so the average caliber of the players, they're there to put on a show. And I'm not there to hold my aces. Sure, on the turn, I was as confused as anybody was, but I thought it was just, too high up on my range, and I've definitely folded aces on stream before and was wrong and got a lot of slack for it. So in this situation, the pot was already so bloated that I still thought potentially shoving here would get an opponent to fold maybe a better hand, probably not, but it's four-way, and as you can see, Corvette Mike really saved me here with his call on the turn.
Yeah, what do you make of that? Like, how did you get the ace queen of spades, which was the nut flush, to fold?
Yeah, I could sit there for minutes or, a very long time to think and deduce every one of their ranges, but ultimately, you can never really know what they're thinking. And like I said, maybe a really bad flush can fold in this situation, and maybe I can get a hand, with decent amount of equity to fold here as well. And just the way it played out was something quite extraordinary.
Yeah, congratulations. And we are going to actually talk about hands, notable hands from our other two panelists. Next, I want to ask Alex about your incredible hand a couple years ago against 17-time World Series of Poker champion Phil Hellmuth. This was actually the largest televised cash pot ever at the time that you won it. And it was just 2 years ago, May 2022. Can you tell us a little bit about the hand and how it came about?
Do I not get a clip? No, it's cool. I can summarize it. So I got invited to this really crazy cash game. The buy-in was $100,000, and I was not a poker player at the time. But there were a lot of content creators playing. You had Mr. Beast, Ninja, XQC, Ludwig. You also had some classic pros like Phil Hellmuth and Tom Dwan. And Alan Keating, if any of you guys watch poker, he's a really high-stakes action player. The game was only $100, $200 in blinds, yet somehow people had done 3 straddles, or they were putting in money before seeing their hands pre-flop, so somehow the pot was already $50,000. I really don't know why I signed up for this. Anyway, it folded over to Phil Hellmuth, who, despite being the most experienced player at the table, was also the tightest and the nittiest, and he pushed all in with around $50,000, or the size of the pot, and it folded to me. I had ace-9 offsuit, which isn't the most beautiful hand anyone has ever seen, but at this game, people were playing extremely loose because half of the table didn't really know how to play poker, and Mr. Beast would go in with any 2 cards, basically. So it was a situation where I thought he would be shoving a lot wider, so I actually ended up calling him. He had ace-8 offsuit, and his quote was, I think, "She calls me with fucking ace-9 off, only Botez would do this." Alan Keating called with ace-3 suited. It folded over to Mr. Beast, who had 2 cards, so of course he went all in with $90,000. Turns out he had queen-5 off. So yeah, the pot ended up being like $330,000 before going even into it. And it was a situation where, like, even if I had 27% equity, I should actually be calling, despite the fact that I only have ace-9 off. Yeah, Phil ended up having ace-8 off somehow. I ended up spiking a 9 and winning the pot, which was pretty crazy.
What a hand.
Yeah, the one thing I love about poker, since I always also play chess, is that even idiots can beat the best players in the world.
But it was super cool. That was a 500K pot, right?
I think it was like 330.
330, okay.
Huge hand. And now, Nate, in your book, On the Edge, you talk about your experience running super deep in the 2023 WSOP main event. In particular, you talk about a hand that you had with ace-jack off when you were at the televised table, right?
Ace-jack suited, don't, yeah.
Ace-jack suited, sorry to downgrade you. And it was a really pivotal hand for you when it came to, as you put it, realizing that you came to win the tournament, not just survive. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so it's day 6 of the main event, and this is the first time that there are 10,000 people in the main event. And like, the main event is one of the softest poker tournaments of the year. There are not 10,000 people like Schwan playing the main event, right? There might be 1,000 good players, and then there's a lot of fish of different kinds, right? But running really well, make it to day 6. Try not to think too much about like what the stakes you're actually playing for are, because literally when you get to day 6, with a $12 million first prize, it's like hundreds of thousands of dollars per pot in equity. But Tony Dunst, who's the World Poker Tour host, raises an early position. I'm in what we call the cutoff, so one from the button before the blinds. I just call it with ace-jack suited. I like that play, it's more flexible. Tony and I are some of the better players at the table, so I'm not trying to like, I'm in position. Then a third guy named Stephen Frederick, something like that, just goes, all of it, was the exact phrase that he used, right? And he shoves, goes all in quite quickly. He has fewer chips than me, but if I were to lose his pot, then I'm down very low. And with ace-jack suited, it's a little bit tricky. I mean, if he has ace-king, I'm in trouble. Obviously, aces, kings, queens, I'm in quite a bit of trouble. You know, I know in the back of my head that theory says it's probably a call. If I'm calling there, then players can exploit that by overly shoving their hands, called squeezing in poker. But it's a big decision. I usually play too fast in poker. I don't know why. It's like a big tournament. I'm like, if there were speed poker, I'd be good at that, I think. But like, I'm going to take my time and wait him out. And I see he's doing a couple of things, right? The main one is that he's like turtle shelling. He's like looking down like this. And I talked to Tom Dwan, who was in the game, about a hand he'd played on a live stream a couple months earlier, another famous live stream hand, right? Well, the other player also had a weak hand and was doing the same gesture, right? So it was like in the back of my head, and then like, I don't know, he just didn't seem comfortable. But combining like the live read, because by the way, when you're playing for stakes like that, or like day 6 of the main event, people have trouble concealing their actual physiological reaction, right? It's not like this is some fake thing. It's like he is probably extremely nervous. He was hoping that both Tony and I would fold instantly. And like once I'm tanking, bad news for him, right? And I wound up making the call. He has ace 10, we hold up. Then the next hand, I lose set over set and bust out of the tournament and go get a, I don't know, fled the venue, because it's on live stream at the same time. But anyway, it was one of my favorite hands until the next hand at least.
Yeah. Yeah, I love your description of it in the book. You mentioned a great player, Sean Deeb, talking to you before you went back to the table, who kind of like inspired you to like go for the win.
Yeah. No, I'm like, you get back, and it's a big deal, right? You're going to like the TV table, and he's like, are you here to like just get 50th place or something? Or are you here to like to win or make a final table? And I'm like, I don't know. I've had the mentality, I think, in poker and life that like I deserve good things, and I'm going to visualize that. I think that's helpful, because you see when you get to like day 6 of a main event, people freeze up and they have like imposter syndrome, and they have survivorship guilt and things like that, and like they're happy to like, oh, I tell all my friends I got to day 5, whatever, go home, So I want to win one of these things eventually. Probably not the main, but you never know.
I love that, because actually when I read that, I had this eerie sense of recognition, because when I went really deep in the main, Sean Deeb asked me something very similar.
Yeah.
And then later I realized like he's super friendly and charismatic. And I realized he was asking me that because if we got at the same table, he wanted to know.
People will give away, he was out of that, but people give away information like all the time. Like friendly questions like, oh, you cheer for a couple weeks, or people, everything conveys information.
And so the title of this panel is Hot Hands. What makes a hand really great and not just well played or good? What's like above the rim in poker?
I think it is when you're combining. I think poker is ultimately a people game with a mathematical basis. So yeah, a hand where you repeatedly play against the same opponents and it's the cat and mouse game. I mean, that's one dimension of it. It's not perfect GTO play.
Yeah, it's definitely not memorizing, charts and strategy. It's more about thinking on your feet and adapting to the players in the game, and using both psychology and all of the math and equity and ranges and all of that stuff to deduce your opponent's potential holdings. And maybe depending on the game, you want to be putting small edges, or maybe it's a very easy game, and you don't want to be up against the other good opponents at your table. So it really just depends what your meta and your micro strategy is given that moment.
So Alex, since you played that cash game hand 2 years ago, or wait, was it almost 3 now? Yeah. You've been playing more and more poker. Naturally, when you win a hand like that, it doesn't take you away from the game, right? What is the thing that you've learned the most about the game and yourself in those last couple years of taking poker more seriously?
The first obvious one is I think I just got better at the game over time. I don't even know if I played in the same game as I did back then, if I would be able to make the same calls now, actually. So some good, some bad. In terms of what I've learned about myself is I am really bad with tilt in both chess and poker. And I've finally learned that since I can't change the fact that I tilt, I need to channel it into getting better and never waste tilt.
What do you mean by that?
So when I lose in a chess tournament or a poker hand, I just get really angry and I can't control it. So I need like a good hour or 2 to feel a little bit better. But then what I've found is that I take that and my mistake is really deeply set into my brain and I'll never forget it again. And then I use that to be like, okay, this is why I need to study more. And then I use that as motivation to get better.
I see. Can you share a time where you tilted in that way? That was a particularly big wake-up call?
So I got invited to play at Triton, which is one of the most prestigious poker tournaments there is. I flew all the way to Monte Carlo. I was playing in a 25K buy-in tournament. I got to play against like Phil Ivey and all of these other top players. There's 1 to 2 hours until I make the money on my first time. I'm feeling really good. I get in a hand where I had Queen Jack, and the flop comes Queen and 2 small cards. The turn is another Queen. My opponent puts in a small bet, and I make a completely beginner mistake and I shove. And the reason why that's bad is because I'm getting all worse hands to fold and all better hands to call. And of course he snap calls me with ace queen and I bust out of the tournament. And I went back to my hotel room, yelled into my pillow, felt terrible. But I will never make that same mistake again or anything similar.
That's a really great example. What about you, Nate and Siobhan? Can you share a time where you maybe tilted and you learned a lot from it?
Yeah, every player tilts in different ways. For me, it's maybe more a matter of impatience. So you might maybe wind up in a similar place, right? If you have queens with a slightly worse kicker versus other queens, you're going to lose most of your chips most of the time anyway. But it's like not taking the time or the patience to like think through a hand, right? And it can often be with your big hands, right? People underrate how important it is to maximize value when you have a set, when you have the nut flush, when you have hands like that, right? Monster draws, and they just kind of like, they're happy because they win a pot and not thinking about how to like play a bigger pot. But look, I feel like poker kind of actually gives me like a lot of, lowers my life tilt overall, right? If you're playing high stakes cash games, you're playing, you make day 6 of a main event or something, right? It's like, okay, I just lost the equivalent of, in that pot set over set, I lost like $600,000 in equity. And I'm like, okay, so if if the stock market's volatile and my 401k is bumping around or some business opportunity doesn't go through or whatever else, I feel it's very good for emotional discipline.
So I think I have the opposite problem is I don't tilt enough. And I think that's actually one of my strengths as a poker player, because I am very even-keeled and, I can play very high stakes. And of course I'm stressed out and there's a lot of pressure, but, especially in the games that I play in, people will try to say things to, throw you off your game and all sorts of, nonsense. But the flip side to that is I also probably don't have the motivation that, someone like Alex does. I don't go back to my room and am super hard on myself. And that also kind of makes it more difficult for me to have the motivation to improve in a lot of ways. And, that's of course very different from when I first started off playing poker, almost 20 years ago now, at a reasonable level. Back then I was way hungrier for sure. And I saw every opportunity as a chance to prove myself because, especially being a female, I felt like I had a lot to prove at that time. But now I feel like, I would rather prefer to lean into my strengths and pick the best games that are best for my hourly and, just try to stay in the industry for as long as I can, for as long as I enjoy it.
So you all mentioned in your answers a little bit some of the life lessons from poker, but is there anything that you feel you learned about finance, negotiation from poker that you don't really learn in school?
I think it teaches you accurate probabilistic thinking, and what I mean by that is betting on uncertainty is one of the best ways to understand it. So for example, if you ask someone their opinion on something and they tell you an answer and they're super confident, and then you ask them if they're willing to bet money on it, they'll all of a sudden become really aware of the possibility that they might be wrong. So poker quite literally teaches you to put your money where your mouth's at.
No, that's was kind of going to be my answer. Let me say one other thing for poker. It's really nice in life to have, if it's your main thing, that's one thing, right? But to have hobbies that you're committed to and probably in theory might actually make money from, right? It's really nice to have things external to maybe your kind of main world that are compatible with it. I think the thinking you learn in poker, since I began playing poker more, I played professionally for a few years in the mid-aughts, right? I just feel like my thinking's become sharper when I take more of my kind of in between recreational hours and are using them to play or study poker. It's kind of disciplined, right? It organizes your thinking and I just think it's very a healthy way to like refine the way you're thinking probabilistically and applying problems in practice.
Recently, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna mention something else about game selection. You know, in school, they don't really teach you that, you know, you don't have to play the game if you don't think you're gonna win, or if it's just not gonna be worth it for you.
Love that. Yeah, game selection, so important in poker, and not something you think about as much in life. I love that. Nate, you recently wrote in a Silver Bulletin about intelligence and the different types of intelligence. How smart do you have to be super good at poker, to play in elite poker games?
Look, I think there are different ways you can get there, right? I mean, look, I think the best poker players need a combination of kind of mathematical intelligence and like social intelligence, particularly for live poker, which I think has a brighter future than online due to AI and RTA and cheating and things like that. I mean, there can be some like savant-like abilities, but it's harder and harder, even in like cash poker. The dream used to be that, okay, tournaments are very volatile. In the long run, you make money, but it might take decades to realize that, literally, right? But you can, as a cash player now, kind of slowly move up the ranks. You start playing 2-5 and 5-10 and 10-25, right? Now, like the public high-stakes cash games are kind of dying in most markets, and online is kind of dying because of RTA and things like that. And so, like, it's like in a field now where you have to have networking and social skills, or you have to be entertaining, or you have to have a lot of money to splash around. And so, you know, poker is becoming more like any other industry where you have to have some hustle. It's no longer just good enough to be really good at the technical aspects of poker. You have to like be a compelling presence. You have to know how to make friends with people. Game selection is so important. I mean, some games are like literally you have 10 times or 50 times the expected value per hour of other games. If you're in a really good high stakes cash game, that's just so much better than any other situation in poker. But there are a limited number of golden tickets.
Alex, how would you compare that to chess, like the type of intelligence you need to be super good at chess versus poker?
An analogy I would use is chess is more like STEM and poker is more like finance/entrepreneurship, but also building off what Nate said. In chess, if you're the best person in the game, you're going to do incredibly well. At poker, if you're the best person in the game, you might not even get invited to some of these things. So it has a lot of other, you know, social skills that you need to be willing to do as well.
And you, of course, as a content creator, brought a lot of new people into chess. How would you kind of compare the situation with poker content and chess content right now?
I think poker and chess faced very similar issues where it's how do you get casual players and casual viewers to watch? And for chess, we were able to sort of get a boost because we invited a lot of content creators from other areas to play chess, and that helped a lot, which is a very obvious thing. If you have content creators or celebrities promoting your thing, it's obviously going to do really well. It's easier said than done. But I actually do think somebody's doing a really good job in this in poker right now. His name is Blake Wynn. He's a young founder and CEO of the Celebrity Poker Tour, which basically brings celebrities, athletes, creators, and even some poker pros like Maria Ho won one of them. And I've never seen anyone do such a good job at consistently bringing people outside of poker to play the game. So hopefully that will help. Unfortunately, you can't really make tournaments for amateurs only or things like that, because then the poker pros wouldn't really have a career anymore.
Siobhan, you're a content creator as well. You have a popular YouTube channel, and people love watching you on the streams that you play in all over the world. In fact, weren't you just in where were you playing poker? You were playing in one of the Tritons.
Cambodia.
Cambodia, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I wouldn't exactly call myself a content creator. Like, Alex is a real content creator. You know, I play on streams, and sometimes I do some commentary based on the hands that I play. I'm definitely not remotely creative like that, but I do enjoy it, and you know, having a YouTube presence has definitely opened up a lot of doors for me. And I think that's also why poker has, you know, continued to evolve the way it has. Just based on all the free educational and entertaining content out there. And yeah, it's going to be really cool to see how that develops in the future as well.
So tomorrow is International Women's Day. I mean, if that one hasn't been canceled yet. And so women, of course, are very underrepresented in poker, as well as in chess. In poker, they have less wealth and they have less wages. But they also bring some other things to the table. How can they mitigate that to become very successful in the game?
I think every woman's path in poker is probably different. I personally actually started off, playing online anonymously. And once I had a good track record there, I was able to find investors to play in bigger games. And I think that's probably, my recommended path. But, and I don't think it always has to be that difficult because, when you're a guy, it's much easier to find community and a group that, kind of, there's no like weird strings attached stipulations to them helping you improve as a player. Definitely experienced a lot of that when I was younger. And so I think it's our responsibility as, other women in the space to definitely invest in women. I almost never say no to other female players who sell their action to me as long as it's a reasonable rate. And I think, as the game evolves, there's going to be, more female role models to look up to as well.
No, I think that was really well put. The only thing I would add there is that sometimes people will play differently against you because you're female. And I mean, this applies to like, if you're an older player, even if you're Brazilian, they're gonna think you're really aggressive. So every different group has their stereotypes, but figuring out in particular how people play differently against you can actually be something you use to your advantage, and you should use everything possible to your advantage. Like sometimes people are trying to chat me up while we're playing poker, and if they're doing that, then I'll be like, oh, come on, like, tell me what you had last hand. Because if they do that to me, then I might as well use every edge possible in the game, so.
They're not going to tell you they were bluffing now.
They're not going to what?
They're not going to say they were bluffing, right?
No, but they do. They show it sometimes and like turn it over.
They actually
try to get a
show
reaction.
It. Yeah. Well, Alex, you've also been very involved in startups, and famously, there's a lot more investment in men than in women in startups. And I feel like some of the things that Xuan was saying kind of reminded me of that it can be harder to sell your action as a woman. Do you have any thoughts on that? Not that that's a problem that you have, but that's something you've observed in startups or in poker.
I actually haven't personally experienced that, which is why it's harder for me to speak on it. So yeah, I don't want to make up an answer that I don't actually have.
Of course, no. What about you, Nate? I know you write about this a little bit on the Edge.
Yeah, as an expert in women's issues, no. I talked to Maria Ho for the book, and she told a story about how she had her friends group in college, and she would do everything within a mixed gendered group, right? Except certain Friday nights, they'd all go hide in one student's dorm room, figured out they were playing poker, and she decided that she had to bribe them by bringing a keg of beer to get her to play, and happily ever after. Now she's now one of the best players in the world. But one lesson from that is I think the barriers to entry for women come early, right? For the most part, if you're playing in a live stream game, you're going to the Poker Go studio, right? The top tier of poker players. In general, these are people who are evolved enough to make women feel relatively comfortable, although you hear stories about certain high-stakes players that might be exceptions to that. But at the 1-3 games, at the 2-5 games, right, you still see plenty of bad, sexist, sometimes racist, homophobic, etc. behavior. And poker's always taking a, hey, what happens at the table stays at the table attitude, and that's part of what's nice about poker, but that helps people who feel more comfortable in their skin. Men have to do less work at a poker table because they kind of naturally blend into the furniture. So I can be in a talkative mood if I want to be, or I can just sit back and play my cards and not worry about things, right? But the other thing is I don't want to in general, I don't want to make men less risk-taking. I want women to feel encouraged to make more smart, positive expected value bets in fields like poker, and hopefully the people on this stage can be avatars and examples for that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I love that. And I also think that women sometimes are more realistic about their skill level, and that can be really good when trying to get better, but when trying to sell something, it can be bad. You need to pump yourself up. And I mean, consciously, I've been trying, I don't, a lot of women I teach a lot of chess classes, poker classes, and if I ask women to tell me their weaknesses in their game, they're very good at doing it, which, like I said, can be a good thing, but it can also be bad because then if I ask them to tell me their strengths, they're not as quick at that. And when you're trying to sell, you need to really be able to show how awesome you are, right? So this panel is a lot about the balance between strategy and intuition. And I saw that you, Alex, played against one of the greatest field intuition players of all time, Daniel Negreanu, in a heads-up match. And it really seemed like you learned a lot from that experience. Can you share anything, any takeaway that you got from him that you were giving away, maybe?
So for context, we were doing a friendly heads-up match, and it was also in a podcast format, so we were talking about a lot of things, which is really a disadvantage if you're playing against Daniel Negreanu, because that's his superpower. He did give me a lot of tips, like I went all in on one hand and left some chips behind, or nearly all in, and he said, because you left some chips behind, it looks like you're less confident, so I'm just going to call you off. And of course, he was right. Or another one, because I was so distracted in the conversation, I wasn't being as used to making sure that I'm not giving off tells. So there was a moment when I looked down at my chips before making a bet, which is usually a tell that you're thinking about making a bet, so you have a strong hand. So then I got no value out of him. But the funny thing is that I tried using some of his tips in other poker games I was playing, and I was just completely wrong on them. And I realized that like the thing about tells is you really have to know when they apply and listen more to your gut just than the general knowledge that this is a tell.
Yeah, that almost all-in one kind of is really interesting. That's basically when you put almost all of your chips in. It's something that a lot of high-stakes pros are doing a lot more of lately, but indeed, I sometimes catch myself doing it, and I'm like, would I be doing the same with every hand in my range? And a lot of times the answer is no, and I need to think about whether I should simplify my strategy then. It did also bring me to a point, because I was just talking about that exact topic with ChatGPT. And Nate, you talked on your podcast with Maria Konnikova a little bit about how you think that ChatGPT can be good for your poker coaching or getting better at poker. Can you give us an example, like a use case for that?
I mean, first of all, in general, we have a lot of younger students here and stuff like that. If you're not prepared for a world where large language models and other AI tools radically change the workplace, including for like kind of smart person, mental computer jobs, then I think you're just wrong, right? I'm like not an AI evangelist, but these tools are coming like a very long way. Poker, I think, ironically, might be robust in a world where AI displaces a lot of work but creates a lot of wealth, right? You have a lot of rich people with extra time on their hands and maybe good for live poker. But look, if you kind of use ChatGPT as a poker coach, which it's not trained for, then it's probably better than half the field, which isn't amazing, but the fact that the trajectory is so upward is interesting. It makes actually the same mistakes that like humans do, right? When there are counterintuitive things, where actually this player who's out of position is supposed to bet sometimes, it will miss them just like a decent human player might, but still, and then like products like GTO Wizard, where they can kind of solve things to a high degree of precision with AI is interesting. Of course, in chess, this is nothing new, right? And it's kind of cool to like look up the answer later and say, oh, I know this play I made, actually that did suck. That was the wrong player. Oh, that was actually right at some frequency. But no, I mean, these models are pretty smart, and poker is similar in the sense that like you're kind of creating a semantic portrait of somebody. In some context, somebody being visibly nervous, which you can't always hide. For some players, they do that when they're bluffing, right? Some players do that when they have a huge hand. They're like, am I going to win even more chips? So it's all contextual, and that kind of context is interesting.
It's interesting that you say that they're more human, they make human mistakes, because I gave ChatGPT some of my poker hands last night, and I felt like it was incredibly results-oriented. So like
That's
if I
funny.
lost a hand, they were like, I think you did that wrong. And if I had the better hand, they were like, maybe you should have value bet that river. And it was like a ridiculous value bet. It was like I had third pair or something, and like with a terrible kicker. And yeah, I thought that was just a starting point. And then of course, when you start talking to them about it, they kind of come around and their advice becomes more nuanced. But it's exactly like the opposite of what you would expect from a traditional solver, which would give you a very kind of, just mathematical, overly analytical answer.
No, the other day I was asking ChatGPT to do like a data cleaning task, actually fairly complex, and I wanted to use more compute power, right? It's OpenAI's resources, so I'm like, I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. Just take your time, right? And actually, it actually did that when I gave us like human intuition for why I wanted it to spend more CPU.
So Xuan, you're known as like a very great player with like live reads. And is there anything you can kind of share with us that could be helpful for the amateur poker players out there? Something that they should kind of try to avoid doing to give away their hand?
Live reads. I mean, everything's contextual, like Nate mentioned. I mean, it just depends on the game that you're in and your opponents. Yes, sometimes, I mean, almost always it helps to be stoic and balanced with your bet sizing and your demeanor and all of that. But if you're in a casual game with VIPs who are just kind of there to have fun, if you act like a robot, they're not going to have fun playing against you. And so sometimes it's much better to just be playful and engage with your opponent rather than not. But just know that once your opponent reaches a certain level of sophistication, that it can be used against you.
Alex, you're going to be on a panel about chess and innovation later today. Is there any kind of poker innovations that you kind of see, that you've seen that you like, or ones that you think are needed?
The first one I think was the one I mentioned briefly with the Celebrity Poker Tour. I think I'm seeing a lot of innovation in content. For example, the biggest poker YouTuber right now is Wolfgang, and he's just capitalized on the short form content and how quick you could go viral with those. He's posting a short every single day. He's almost at 2 million subs. And he also just cashed his first, not his first trading event, but his biggest cash for almost like 600,000, which is awesome. Who else is doing interesting content in poker? Hustler Casino Live, I think, really set the standard for live streams. And now I think they're a little bit oversaturated, but they really figured out how to make an interesting storyline, figure out high stakes poker. They did the 24-hour stream. So they were really innovating on a lot of formats. And then I've seen a lot of companies that are still in stealth, so I won't name them, that are trying to solve for the same big problem, which is how do you get casual players and viewers in? And the angle for that is always attracting people outside of poker. I've seen some innovation in solvers. Obviously, there's GTO Wizard. Another one that popped up was Octopi Poker, which was another solver, and I thought the way they did it was like slightly more intuitive when you're looking at the board, because it actually has a table that you could do it with rather than just looking at graphs. But I haven't seen anything groundbreaking yet. So maybe someone in this audience can figure it out and send me an email, because I'm curious.
Nate, John, do you have anything to add?
I think there are some parallels, because you mentioned getting new audiences, right? I think there are some parallels to sports where like the big sports leagues now are very good at optimizing their current fan base or optimizing revenues from that, right? Meaning you get rich people to pay more and more for like Knicks tickets. For example, I'm a victim of that myself, right? Or engage in different ways. So in poker right now, if you are somebody who is a experienced to plus poker player, then there are all these great tools and solvers, and you can hire coaches and good free videos and good things you can pay for, right? And lots of like live tournaments to play in. If you're at the entry level though, that becomes a bit more challenging, right? Fundamentally poker has a very steep learning curve. We have lots of jargon that's like hard to translate, and so like it's pretty hard to make videos that capture both the advanced, intermediate, and beginning players, and like I think that's vital. I mean, we don't have poker on ESPN anymore. It's on Poker Go, and Poker Go the production values are better and the announcers are better and they're fantastic, right? But if you don't kind of sow that newer, wider audience, and because the game is getting older, after years of getting younger.
Yeah. One interesting thing that I think we're going to see more often on the tours, the established tours, is different fun formats for tournaments, like win the button, or all these like silly mixed games, and tournaments where you can only enter if you have a certain amount of like Hendon Mob cashes or below certain amounts, stuff like that. And in cash games, I think we're just going to see more silly formats of prop games like Seven Deuce and Squid Game, which I talked about last year, where it's nearly impossible to put into a solver, and because almost every game I play is 5-way to a flop, and like I was mentioning with my hand, there's just so much randomness. You don't know what this person had for lunch that's not going to make them want to fold on this, their lucky turn card or something like that. So many variables that just to make the game more interesting and less conventional.
Yeah, I played in a really fun tournament this year at Poker Stars where half the field was women and half the field was men, and it was just so much fun. It's like you can innovate in all sorts of ways, like both with the social part of the game and then also with the actual mechanics. And I think there's still a lot of room for that. So which athlete, politician, or celebrity do you think would be amazing at poker? They don't know anything about the game, but if they tried to learn it from scratch, who do you think would be really good? Alex?
Well, this one's kind of a cheat because I already know they're really good, but in general, chess players have a really good chess to poker pipeline, so I would bet on any of the top grandmasters to chess. Poker actually steals a lot of top talent from chess because there's more financial incentives, and much less so than going from poker to chess where you just see people playing chess casually.
You gotta pick a sports person.
I'm trying to think of people who, I don't know. Shane Batty would probably be good at poker. I think he probably has played some too, I think.
We are in the room. That's what this room is called, so.
I played poker with Daryl a few times, and with that, I'll pass my answer to Schwan.
I don't know, Barack Obama.
Oh yeah, he's supposed to be pretty good. I heard he's a little tight though.
Oh, okay, I can see that.
When he's putting money in the pot, he's got it. That's what they say. So some great audience questions. We have a few more minutes for them, so I'm going to take some of them. Thank you for all the great questions. We got, who are some of your favorite poker players or role models? Whoever wants to start.
I actually watched a lot of Doug Polk because he's really good at explaining things, and he also has a website which sends me emails, and it's like how to play pocket eights, how to play this or that, and his explaining has just been really helpful for me personally.
I got to talk to Doyle Brunson for the book before he passed away, and he's still like an absolute legend of the game. You could tell he was getting up there in years. The last story he told me was about how he had seen two players die at the poker table, which seemed like kind of weird foreshadowing. But I was very appreciative that he took the time to relate some stories from an era when poker was kind of this outlaw activity where he was robbed at gunpoint half a dozen times. But I don't know, I've become friends with some of the poker players I admire, so that's been very, very nice.
As they say, never meet your heroes. But I look up to Maria Ho a lot. I think, her professionalism and the way, she represents the game is incredible. And I wish to have as much confidence as her at some point. Doug Polk is also a good response to that. He's also a great content creator, and also Vanessa Selbst. She was already very established when I was first starting out, and despite what you want to say about some of her, the theoretical aspect of her game, I really admired how she just did not care. If she made a mistake and was super off range and was berated by her opponents at all.
Couldn't agree more with all these options. What deviations from theory do you guys make against recreational players, and what would be the best way to exploit them? Whoever that is in the audience wants to play a poker game with us later.
I just, in general, try to get in against more hands with them. I think that's the easiest one.
Yeah, I might push back against that. You can get into more pots with them when you're in position, when you have deeper stacks, so your post-flop advantage kind of comes into play a lot more. Sometimes the adjustments in really loose cash games, if you want to play correctly, are kind of boring, which is that you have to tighten up more pre-flop, and so you're going to war with better ammunition on average, and then post-flop, you definitely can have some bluffs because they have such weak ranges that they have lots of stuff they have to fold out, right? But if you start adapting to a really loose live cash game by playing like everybody else, so a lot of loose passive calling pre-flop, then you might necessarily be better than anybody else, right? You can react with aggression, and obviously in position you can do a lot of things and have some maneuverability, but like sometimes the boring answer is you actually have to play tighter in looser environments and looser, more aggressive in tighter environments.
We have a little bit of a nerdy question here. How close do you think we are to AI solving multi-way hands? I don't think we're that close, because multi-way is like so very different. And Siobhan, I see you nodding.
Yeah, you know, it's a subject I brought up a few times. There's just so much randomness in multi-way situations, and you know, not only there's just so many different ranges to solve, but if one person just decides that, you know, and you don't know their strategy, but inside their strategy is that they want to pick, or they want to win pots specifically against you or another opponent in the hand, it just like, you know, like messes everything up so much, and we should just, you know, if you have to play in multi-way pots, don't fold good hands, and you know, try not to bluff that often.
Well, you know, I think that's a great place to end, because we did start with this amazing multi-way hand from you winning the Global Poker Award for the best hand of the year, and it did kind of show like how crazy it is when you add those extra elements into the game. But thank you, everyone, for coming. I really appreciate the audience questions, and I'll try to answer some of them myself online, because we got so many and we didn't get to all of them. But Alex, Nate, Siobhan, you did such a great job today, and it was so wonderful to have your insights.
Thanks, everyone.